Okay, we're going to be starting off with the United Kingdom, so let's go ahead and get going. First thing, Constitution and legal system of the United Kingdom. The Constitution of the United Kingdom is typically said to be unwritten, but that's not quite true. In actuality, a better way to describe it would be that it is largely unwritten. What this means is that the Constitution is based in part on these unwritten customs or what are said to be conventions. These are simply understandings of how things are to be done, kind of rules of the road, and again, those would be largely unwritten. These come into being through a process called gradualism. In the United Kingdom, we could describe political change as being evolution rather than revolution. The fact is that the United Kingdom doesn't have typically abrupt changes. It's not to say that those haven't happened, but for the most part, if we can compare the United Kingdom to most other political systems, we find that there is a lack of abrupt change and much more gradual change. Other parts of the Constitution of the United Kingdom would be written, and as an example would be the Magna Carta, also the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. Um, the consequences for having an unwritten constitution would be that the political system has a lot of flexibility. Um, so whenever changes come about, they don't have to necessarily go through a formal process of constitutional amendment that you would find, for example, in the United States. The legal system of the United Kingdom would be classified as common law. A common law legal system is a system of judge-made law based upon custom and precedent. The fact that it is judge-made law obviously then increases the policy-making power of the judiciary. In a common law legal system, statutes, or the product of a legislative body, is typically vague or general, and it's the job of the judiciary to narrow down the meaning of those statutes and the application of those statutes and apply them to specific situations. How those statutes have been applied form a body of law known as common law. So those precedents have tremendous value. This isn't quite what you would find in a civil law legal system. An important consideration when we think about the Constitution and the legal system of the United Kingdom is parliamentary sovereignty. What is meant by that term is that all governing power is vested in the Parliament. And as such, the Parliament, for lack of a better way to explain it, can do no wrong. Obviously, what they do might be disapproved of by the majority of the population, but there's no way for Parliament to violate the Constitution. By violating the Constitution, Parliament has, in effect, changed the Constitution. As a result of this, there is no judicial review in the United Kingdom. The judiciary cannot invalidate an act of Parliament because it violated the Constitution, because, again, should the Parliament pass a statute that goes against the current understanding of the Constitution or of some sort of statute that is given constitutional status, Parliament did, in effect, change the Constitution. There's some emerging challenges to parliamentary sovereignty, and these would be, for example, devolution. The United Kingdom has gone through a process of returning or turning over decision-making powers to regional governments located in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And these regional governments are asserting their right to make their own decisions regardless of what the government in Westminster wants. Another challenge to parliamentary sovereignty is the fact that the United Kingdom is a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. And as a signatory, it has to guarantee certain levels of civil liberties and civil rights. So should Parliament pass a piece of legislation that would violate civil liberties and civil rights as specified by the European Convention on Human Rights, then the judiciary could challenge Parliament's ability to do that. So we're not quite sure how that would work out, but definitely the fact that the UK is a signatory challenges parliamentary sovereignty. Some recent constitutional revisions in the United Kingdom, or probably a better way to put this category would be to talk about some recent regime changes in the United Kingdom, changes to the political system. The first one is a change in the composition of the House of Lords. The United Kingdom Parliament is a two-house parliament. It's bicameral, has a House of Commons and House of Lords. Historically, the House of Lords was the house of nobility. People in the House of Lords inherited their position, although over time, some individuals were appointed to a position called a life peer, and they were allowed to participate in Commons, participate in Lords, vote in Lords, and so forth, but they would not be able to pass on their position to their children. Um, Over time, the United Kingdom has become more and more democratic, and one of the most recent democratic reforms in the 90s was the decision to strip away the power or strip away the membership of most of the hereditary peers in the House of Lords. So um, most of the voting members of the House of Lords, the people that actually have a say in the House of Lords, are these life peers that are appointed by various governments from time to time. And this has definitely had the effect of making the House of Lords more democratic. Another recent constitutional change has been the creation of a Supreme Court, or a Supreme Court separate from Parliament. Historically, the highest appellate court in the United Kingdom was the House of Lords, specifically the Law Lords in the House of Lords, and they had the authority to review judicial decisions from various courts throughout the United Kingdom. With the creation of the Supreme Court, this appellate judicial power has been removed from the House of Lords and invested in a separate institution. Please bear in mind, this does not necessarily create judicial review for the United Kingdom. The Supreme Court of the United Kingdom does not have the power of judicial review. Devolution. Devolution is the process of turning over decision-making power to regional governments. Increasingly, we see regional governments being given more and more authority to handle local matters, and the Parliament in Westminster being confined mainly to national policy making. Fixed-term Parliament. Typically, what had happened in the past is that Parliament had a variable term, which meant that as long as an election was held every 5 years, the Parliament continued to sit. And what prime ministers typically would do would be to try to wait till their popularity was high, then they would call for a dissolution of Parliament, elections would be held, and then a new Parliament would begin, and the 5-year clock was reset. Prime ministers couldn't always do this. Sometimes the clock would run down, so to speak, and an election would have to happen. But definitely that gave the prime minister some wiggle room to try to manipulate events to secure majority status for his or her party. With the 2 parliaments ago, deal was cut between the Liberal Democrats and the Tories to create this fixed-term Parliament of 5 years, and that's the pattern now. So there is no more variable term. Parliament will sit. A Parliament will sit for 5 years. Geographic distribution of power. So with geographic distribution of power, what we're looking at is how is power allocated in a political system? Is it concentrated at a national level, or is it divided between national and regional governments? Do regional governments hold most of the power? With this way of classifying governments based upon geographic distribution of power, there are 3 primary models: confederate, federal, and unitary. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is unitary in theory. All governing power is vested in the national government, the Parliament that sits at Westminster. They hold all decision-making power. Yes, they have been turning some of that power over to regional governments, but in theory, legal theory, that power could be reclaimed, although that would probably be very difficult to do. So through this process of devolution, decision-making power has been given to these regional governments, and what that has had a tendency to do is to make the United Kingdom act more federal in practice. This is somewhat of a reverse of what we see in the United States, where the United States legally is a federation where power is divided between a national government and regional governments. But in the case of the U.S., we've seen power become increasingly concentrated at the national level through fiscal federalism, where the national government has the ability to manipulate state behavior through the uses of various grants. So the United States, while legally federal, has become increasingly unitary. In the United Kingdom, they are legally unitary. That is what they are, or how they are classified, but they have become increasingly federal in practice. One of the interesting byproducts of this process of devolution has been the Wesleyan question, or the English question. If the Parliament in Westminster, which is composed of members of Parliament from Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland, has the authority to make policy for all of the United Kingdom at both a local level and a national level, but then this Parliament turns over local decision making to parliaments in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but retains decision-making authority over England as opposed to the entire United Kingdom, then it is possible that you would have members from Scotland, Wales, and then Northern Ireland voting on laws that are specifically applicable to England only. And that's caused some concern, and there are various proposals to try to sift through that. But as it stands now, the Parliament that sits in Westminster makes policy for all of the United Kingdom as well as just the country of England itself. Because the United Kingdom is unitary in theory, all local governments or regional governments derive their authority from the central government or national government. They have only the power that is given to them, and that power can be taken away at a future time, although there might be political consequences for this to happen. Regime type. When we refer to the word regime, what we're talking about is the system of government. In the United States, we typically use the terms government to mean system and administration to mean people, but in political science, those terms are properly going to be used, or the proper terms would be regime and government. A regime refers to the system of government, and the word government refers to the people who run it. So the regime type in the United States would be presidential democracy or democracy, various other ways to describe it. And the government would be a Republican government or a Democratic government. So the regime type in the United Kingdom would be constitutional monarchy. That would be one way to describe it. And what is meant by this is that, yes, there is a monarch, but the power of the monarch are restricted by the Constitution. In the United Kingdom, the power of the monarch is greatly limited. In theory, the monarch retains the ability to veto legislation. The last successful veto was in, I believe, the late 1700s. In essence, the monarch has little to no power. The most significant power the monarch perhaps has is the ability to, what we say, to consult and to be consulted. And what that means is that the monarch meets on a weekly basis with the Prime Minister. I doubt very seriously that there is anyone in the United Kingdom who knows more about British politics than Queen Elizabeth. While her opinions on various policy aren't necessarily public, she definitely has had an influence over the shape of policy through her ability to consult with various prime ministers. While decision-making is still retained by actual decision-making, final decision-making is still retained by the Parliament. Another way to classify the United Kingdom based upon regime type would be parliamentary democracy. This can be contrasted with presidential democracy, where you have, in parliamentary democracy, you have a fusion of executive and legislative power into one institution.